Blimey. Oh, this is one hell of a jam jar you got here.
Warning. The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host and curator of the House of Mystery. And in the studio, or the House of Mystery, whatever you want to call it, is the demon bisexual butler, David Sabal. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
All right, so welcome. In this episode, we are jumping back into classic Hellblazer with a formal discussion and analysis of Hellblazer number 4, titled Waiting for the Man. Originally published in April 1988, which delves into the world of Constantine as he confronts a sinister threat while exploring themes of religious extremism. Very dark stuff here.
Oh, yeah.
Very dark stuff. I mean, talking about pedophilia, the murder of children, and then the possession of their souls or their apparitions. I mean, it's not a soft and cozy read, Dave.
No, it isn't. And that's the thing. I love the importance of this issue is like this is the one that sets the tone for the narrative of Hellblazer up to like issue number 300, the last one. Because like the first 3 issues to me were like introductory. Here's our character, John Constantine. Here's the world he lives in. Here's the ideas of magic and angels and demons.
It's our introduction. Yeah.
Here is, okay, this is, for me, I've always felt that this was the first chapter or the first.
This is when the shit really starts.
Yeah. When the story really does begin for Hellblazer.
Yeah. Yeah, this issue is very different from the prior 3. The narrative intent is a bit more subtle. There's a more personal element that grounds the story as well. Certainly there's a supernatural element, but where we've had more of an indirect discourse about Constantine, you know, his decisions and the ramifications of such decisions. With issue 4, it's more direct.
Yes.
Subtle but direct. And it seems a little contradictory, but you know, that's the intriguing factor of Delano's writing.
Well, that's the thing about this storytelling too, is like, for me, I've always felt Hellblazer was at the forefront of experimental narrative storytelling in comics.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's certain things that Delano started in issues 1 through 3, but in issue 4, this is where he gets to set the tone narratively. So you see that he does like he doesn't break rules, but he bends them. The way he actually places all the narrative beats in this story, in this issue.
Yeah.
I used to remember when I first read Hellblazer, the thing that always got me was it was the type of writing that forced you to read the comic more than once, because the narrative would almost confuse you at first, but then you'd have to go back and read it and see, oh, okay, this is how steps 1, 2, and 3 all connect.
You can't do a superficial read of an issue like this.
No, you can't. And that when I was younger and getting into comics, this is the series that basically made me realize there's more to comics than just good guy shows up, good guy faces the villain, good guy wins the day.
Mm-hmm.
Hellblazer truly showed me the potential that comics have to do visual storytelling, where it's like it goes beyond being a kid thing, and now it's more of a everybody down to adult thing where adults can read this and get something out of it.
Well, there's a worldview that's included in many of Delano's stories. In fact, probably all of them.
Oh yeah,
There's definitely a worldview there, and that's more or less the intent of the narrative. For this issue, it might be less obvious, meaning it veers from the prior 3 episodes, ideologically speaking. But the inclusion of Constantine's sister and niece pulls back the curtain and allows the reader to become a part of a skewed domestic sphere that parallels, and this part's important, that of the villain of the story and his unorthodox and, quite frankly, pedophiliac family.
Yes.
So besides the familial aspects, the issue also introduces key characters and groups such as Zed, which is a big one.
Yeah.
His niece Gemma, another big one.
Another big one.
His sister Cheryl, and the group, the Resurrection Crusade, and a volatile Christian activist group, or I should say the Resurrection Crusade, which is a volatile Christian activist group, and a so-called shadowy collective known as the Damnation Army.
Damnation Army.
Yeah, so with all of that, we can also surmise that the issue meticulously worked on fleshing out the cosmology of Constantine's world. So Delano was working from various angles when it comes to this specific issue here.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me now, like, covering this issue in particular and getting to the very end and then being reminded what the journey is going to be for 300 issues for these characters. And I actually went back and read issue 300 just to actually coincide with this, because in a lot of ways,
don't get too heavy into spoilers, only because I know there's listeners that are following along and reading for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can get into some, but don't get into giant.
I'm not going to get into giant spoilers, but if you actually read issue 4 to issue 300, there's not many comic books out there that have that type of scope where you have
narrative consistency.
A narrative consistency like this. I mean,
it's pretty fucking amazing.
The closest one and the only one that I can think of is Kirkman with Invincible and Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And everyone loves those.
That's a fair comparison, yeah.
And anything else, not really, because in comics nowadays, it's all about reboots and rehashing. Oh, we got to do, suddenly everyone gets rebooted back to square one. No, if you read Hellblazer 4 to 300, it's a very concise narrative about John Constantine and his family, essentially his family.
Yeah. Yeah, so broadly speaking, Delano uses issue 4 to delve into the world of Constantine, as you've been alluding to, when it comes to his family specifically, as he confronts a sinister threat while exploring themes of religious extremism and dangerous occult practices and the lengths, and this is key here, that Constantine will go to save his loved ones.
Yeah.
So, Dave, before we move forward into some heavy areas of theory, what were your initial thoughts on this issue? Because I know you've read these before, but as you're rereading for the purposes of this discussion, what does issue 4 do for you?
Issue 4, as I said, when you go back and actually read Hellblazer, I begin to realize just how seminal and pivotal Hellblazer is to comic book history.
And also extremely relevant.
Extremely relevant, even by today's standards.
Yes.
It
holds up.
It holds up. And yeah, a lot of Delano's point of views in the early goings in Hellblazer could be skewed because of the time frame that he wrote, especially since it's in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But he still has these very poignant philosophical points of view in his story that you can still take, even if it might be inspired by something he saw back in his life in England, you could still take that point of view and put it to America today. And basically, I don't know, for me, especially when I was reading this, it kind of made me really shocked to think some of the stuff that in Hellblazer #4, especially like the talk about religious extremists, still carries weight today.
Absolutely.
And it's like we're still dealing with a problem of religious extremists in today's world.
The only difference is Delano's views were probably way more way more controversial in the 80s as opposed to today. People may pick up Hellblazer now and be like, "Oh, well, these are common ideas now in the progressive world we live in." Because even though we have a lot of problems, there's still a lot of prejudices, homophobia.
Yeah.
Those things are still present. But the rebuttal to those things, to the anti aspects of progressive thought, it's more common for people to speak out. It's not as controversial. But then you have aspects like pedophilia.
Yes.
I mean, think about that, David. In 1988, there's a story where a guy kidnaps children, murders them, sacrifices them to, well, up to this point, an unknown demon, and then has relations
With them.
as ghosts.
Yes.
That's fucked.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah.
So that was going on in 1988. 1988. And it's not exploitive. Some people might say, well, that's offensive and exploitive. He's not doing it for exploitation purposes.
Yes.
He's doing it to say something.
Yes.
He is saying something ideologically about the world that he's currently living in reality.
That's the difference, I think, in Delano's writing when you look at early Hellblazer. A lot of people think that, oh, this is how we write great exploitation storytelling, because you want to shock your audience. You want to
This isn't shock
disturb them.
This isn't shock to increase your readership.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in today's standard, a lot of writers just do that. They do shock for readership.
Yeah.
Delano back in this day was using the shock and the disturbing nature to tell his story, to get his point across.
Yeah.
And the closest thing that I would say is like to Delano's writing today is Spurrier's run, which is an underrated run of Hellblazer that apparently, sadly, no one read.
That mermaid episode, or that mermaid issue, is right up there with this type of stuff.
With this type of
It's
stuff.
fucking dark, disturbing.
And it talks about basically like,
Prejudice.
prejudice with, bestiality, which is really strange.
Some people have mermaid fantasies, David.
Mermaid
Simmer down.
Oh, come on. But
Listen,
you don't want to have
ever
relations with
since
that
the
mermaid.
80s when Little Mermaid came out, I was like, I like redheads.
But Mike, then Spurrier ramped it up, just
With
like how
fins.
Delano did with like, okay, mer babies, take that.
You know you want to. No, we're not going to start singing Little Mermaid songs.
Mermaid.
All right, so bringing it back to this issue and getting into some heavy theory aspects here. Most of the narrative implications seem to be designed to address religious extremism with the inclusion of the Resurrection Crusade. They are able to dissect layers of fringe radical thought and the dangers affiliated through the ones that demonstrate an unwavering belief and a readiness to take action based on their interpretations of religious doctrine. That's a threat. That's a big aspect of the issue. It isn't the end-all villain in this issue per se. It's the pedophile, but they are a relevant aspect that essentially they're red flags.
Yeah.
They're plot red flags saying this is going to be a thing, guys. Keep your eyes on this group.
And John Constantine's the man who knows what he's looking after. I mean, my favorite thing about that was toward the end when looks at the religious mob and he says, "I don't want to get in front of being in front of a what was it, a fanatical mob,
Something like that, yeah.
something about that." And
I just like that they knew who he was.
Yeah.
They're like, fuck this guy.
and he knew them, which is even better.
Yeah, it's awesome. So in essence, the Resurrection Crusade serves as a representation of the dangers that can arise when religious fervor becomes extreme and is taken to harmful extremes. So alongside the Resurrection Crusade, Constantine encounters the Damnation Army. The presence of this shadowy group adds an additional layer of conflict and complexity to the story. The clash between these, I guess you can call them supernatural forces, demonstrates the multifaceted nature of the occult world Constantine operates in, which goes right in line with what you were saying at the top of the show, Dave, that this in a lot of ways is the issue that really kicks open the door to the cosmology of Hellblazer. It's introducing a lot of key factors that end up becoming big parts of Constantine's story.
Yes.
You have these various factions with differing motivations and powers that are vying for dominance or interference within human affairs.
Yeah.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Oh, absolutely. Because, like, especially from the last issue, if our past listeners remember our last issue that we covered in issue number 3, they introduced this little thing that in the occult world, all those demons and angels, we humans are caught in the middle. And we're almost seen like cattle to all the magic and all the demons that are in the world. And then Delano continues.
We're like useful idiots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Delano continues that feeling in this in this issue by establishing his narrative that basically everyone is just caught in the middle, and John is the one who sees the truth. And he's the one that basically knows what's going on.
Yes, but even in this issue, you still get the idea that, yes, Constantine has an awareness of what's happening, but you also get the idea that this is something new as well, that it's something that's lurking, that hasn't completely manifested itself yet, but he's aware that there's something in the works.
There's something in the works.
Something big is coming. And that also plays into a bit of the moral ambiguity of Hellblazer as a title as a whole, because you have, in this particular issue, you have Constantine navigating a murky landscape where these different groups with their own ideologies and motivations collide. And what we end up with, or what Delano does, is he forces Constantine to make difficult choices.
Yes.
And as we know, Constantine is a consequentialist, which means he makes decisions based on the greater good. Yes. And the greater good sometimes may not work out for you over there. But it may work out for this group over here,
or who John basically fixates on. I'm going to do this for them,
right?
And establishing the fact that basically this narrative starts with John's blood family. You know, his sister, his brother-in-law, and his niece.
Yeah.
Who they start off from the get-go saying that the niece idolizes her uncle.
Listen, I would idolize him. I'd be like, dude, you're my uncle. Let me work with you, bro.
Oh, John Constantine's probably the coolest uncle ever.
I would be more like Shia LaBeouf's version of Jesus Christ. What's his cohort's name?
Oh, and
Chaz.
Chaz.
I would be more like Shia LaBeouf's version
of Chaz.
Chaz. Just come on, put me in, coach. And then I'd end up dying.
Like and then you'd end up dying like him in the movie.
Yeah. So certainly there's no moral ambiguity connected to the absolute disgust of a pedophile that murders children and then weds their disembodied apparitions. But the moral ambiguity aspects are more or less how Constantine chooses to deal with such a situation and the associated methods of his sister's religious affiliations with the Resurrection Crusade.
Yeah, because like, I thought the genius point that Delano did was he made John's sister really sympathetic. Like, I love the point where basically she says,
I don't know if she was sympathetic. I feel like she was a big dummy.
no, for me, at first, you could say
possibly
that.
psychological abuse, perhaps. Maybe that's why she acts a bit browbeaten and submissive.
Well, the thing I liked about it, Delano explained it when she has that conversation with John,
Yeah.
where she says, "Hey, listen, we're in a crisis where basically they were going to be homeless, and they lost their jobs.
Yeah, you're right.
And then all of a sudden, the Resurrection Crusaders came by, paid everything, gave them a house, gave them everything, and it's like, well." What do you want? What do you want me to do, John? Do you want your niece to be homeless, or do you want me to actually, get a roof over over her head? And it's like that was the scene that basically for me turned everything. Where you can actually take someone who you take that out. Absolutely, I would view John's sister as a dummy, like what you.
No,
what
you're
were saying.
right, David. No, you are definitely on the right track here because again, we're dealing with religious extremists
Religious extremists.
and dogmatism, and essentially all that points to a cult.
I think the dummy,
And-
the true dummy, is his brother-in-law.
Yes, you are right, and that's really the point, right? To show that she is in a bad situation with not a lot of choices, and there is a little bit of psychological abuse there coming from the husband as well as the extremist group that seems to be involved in all their actions in their life, their family decisions. So that's another aspect of the issue itself. It's a critique of dogmatism in a lot of
Yes.
ways. And this is done through the inclusion of the Resurrection Crusade, as we were talking about, and their obvious opposition to Constantine. Because what do cult leaders typically dislike? They don't like people who think for themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Constantine is very much an independent mind. That is the biggest threat to cults. Because cults like to be the collective mind. You do as we say.
As
We
we
all
say.
do the same thing. We do this together.
Or it's very, very similar to like when I was reading this a long time ago. I remember reading this and going, the cult religious group that his brother-in-law and sister are tied to are very reminiscent to like the religious groups you would see in the Bible Belt and here in America.
Yeah.
Give me money and I swear God will give us a prayer and sign that life will change. Like those.
Is that not
preachers.
real? Because I've donated money. I thought they could make your prayers come true.
See?
That's not.
See? That's dogmatism.
Pat Robertson was,
Pat Robertson.
definitely at the end of a lot of my money. I'd be like, here you go, Pat Robertson.
That's who I initially a long
Thank
time
you.
ago thought about the
Give me
500
that
club.
money. I need that money to save souls. Is that how he talks, right?
Exactly.
Well, I don't talk much now except in hell because I died recently.
And
I'm
all
sorry,
the
Pat Robertson
pedophilia-
fans out there.
and all the pedophilia that I did.
Oh, these children are just so cute. I mean, did I say that out loud? I mean, they're God's children.
Just cause children. That's just not right.
Whatever, fuck them. So I suppose there's yet another layer to this issue here. It highlights the potential harm of dogmatic beliefs.
Yeah.
And also the hindrance that certain dogmatism presents when it comes to critical thought and cooperation among other groups, which that's a problem today that we see. There are groups that are completely divided ideologically speaking, and a lot of it has to do with these ultra conservative values. And listeners, we're not pointing fingers at people who are Christian or religious. We're talking about the nut jobs.
The nut jobs.
The zealots. The people who have no desire to view other potential. What am I speaking about now? I lost my train of thought. Hold on a second.
Basically, people that their way is the only way.
Yeah, and we do see that a lot in today's world where
Oh, yeah.
we are so divided that there isn't even cooperation among other groups. And obviously we know, we learned at a very young age, cooperation is how to get things done in a more efficient manner. And when you allow certain beliefs to interfere with said cooperation, we start to see problems. That's what happened with Gemma in this issue. The reason why she almost died is because the Resurrection Crusade refused to work with anyone.
Yes.
Particularly Constantine, who knew exactly who he was searching for, or at least a general idea of what to search for, and yet they refused because of their narrow views.
Not just their narrow views, it's just the fact that their zealot behavior in just believing that God will come and save them. Because
Well,
that's
if you give me $5 every month. Wait, no, that's not enough.
No.
If you donate $500 right this minute, well, then God will save you
and that's that whole
from
scene,
pedophiles.
that whole scene with his sister and brother-in-law talking to, I forgot the guy's name that off my head, the leader of the Crusaders. When he basically tells them, and I have it right in front of me, thousands of your fellow Crusaders are linked in the pyramid of prayer to help you.
If someone ever spoke to me like that, I would fucking run.
And no, but think about this: if it was your child,
Yeah.
that was in trouble, and that's what your religious group
Like, no, thank you. Pass.
pass.
Yeah. Now, David, there are real world or potential real world cultural inspirations I'm sure Delano was pulling from.
Yeah.
Or at
no
least
doubt.
something that possibly inspired him to write such an indictment on radical extremism. And these are some of those indirect aspects that I was speaking of earlier. So for cultural context, now keep in mind that this issue was originally published in April 1988. In the United Kingdom, right around the time this issue was published, there was discussion leading up to a law that was eventually enacted just a month after the issue was published. It was known as Section 28 or Clause 28, and it was an amendment to the Local Government Act that prohibited the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities.
Yes.
At this time, from the perspective of conservative Christian groups, Section 28 was seen as a response to what they perceived as the increasing acceptance and visibility of homosexuality in the society. Oh, please! Oh, why?
Two
Why?
men kissing each other. Oh my God.
Oh, there's increasing acceptance. How dare you? But it goes without saying that Section 28 sparked intense debate and protests. While not exclusively tied to radical Christian perspectives, the enactment of Section 28, according to reports, did resonate with certain conservative Christian groups who held strong anti-LGBTQ plus beliefs. So it reflected a broader societal and cultural struggle between progressive social change and traditional religious values during that period. So here we have another example of dissecting societal debate and controversy through the progressive lens of Hellblazer.
Oh, absolutely. And I have no doubt Delano was inspired and using what he was probably seeing as, you know, a normal human being watching the news and watching what was going on around him. And it makes it's hilarious when I think about it. And I actually looked into this for Section 28, like you told me we were going to be covering.
Yeah.
And right from the top, Section 28 was supported by religious groups such as the Salvation Army, the Christian Institute, Christian Action Research and Education, the Muslim Council of Britain, and the Pentecostal British Union. And basically those were all like religious groups in England during that time that were huge, and it makes me giggle that basically one of the groups, the the pedophile that basically was taking advantage of the children in the story that Delano was writing, was tied to the Damnation Army. Meanwhile, you have the Salvation Army.
You don't think that's a coincidence?
I don't. Come on, that had to be something he saw.
Yeah, especially with that word reversal there, salvation, damnation.
Yeah,
you're probably right, Dave. What a great pick on. I didn't pick up on that.
And that's the thing, is kind of like when you look at it, you can see that basically he was being inspired by the things that he was seeing around us.
Yeah.
Or around him during that time.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
And it says a lot that basically those elements can still carry strength today.
Yeah.
Where we could say, okay, yeah, we don't see though that actual happening that Delano did around him at that time, but we can see that today.
Yeah.
We can see that with different groups today. I mean, shoot, we made the joke about Pat Robertson. And I'm sorry, the 500 Club.
700 Club.
Or 700 Club.
How dare you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was $200.
That's my legacy.
That's 200 children less.
Oh, well, you think it's named after how many children he killed?
You never. No.
We might get sued for that.
We might get sued for that.
Let's slow down here.
But that's the thing, is like you look at that and you see the similarities, and then that's when that idea of writing with a theme transcends anything in time.
Yeah.
You can the idea of religious zealotry.
Yeah.
And how it can go awry.
Zealotry. I like that.
That was a word that just popped in my head.
I like that. That's a great adjective.
But like that type of belief can be so damaging, and it can be even worse than any demon that John Constantine can face.
Yeah. Zealotry is very dangerous. I'm going to use it a couple more times during this show.
During this show.
All right, so let's switch gears and talk a little bit about suburban bliss and how it applies to Constantine and the horror genre as a whole. Because, as I said, Delano was coming at this from various angles. Another hot thing in the late 70s, early 80s was this idea of flipping suburban bliss on its head and fucking with people. Suburban bliss, just to keep it simple, I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but suburban bliss and the horror genre often intersect in storytelling to create a contrast. Yeah, contrast. That's the best way to say it. Between the seemingly perfect suburban life and the underlying darkness that lurks beneath. And this combination has been a very popular theme in various forms of media, including movies. And I would say specifically in movies, books, and television shows. And certain key aspects of suburban bliss and how they intertwine with the horror genre are, and I'm just going to name a few: the illusion of safety, dark secrets, subverted expectations, isolation and vulnerability, descent into madness, conformity and repression, invasion of the familiar. Now, those 7 key aspects, I guarantee you, if we were to spend another 2 hours on this particular discussion, we can probably highlight all 7 within the issue. We can probably connect all 7 aspects with an element in Hellblazer issue 4.
Oh, easily.
And the reason why I bring this up, and the reason why I was looking for this as I was reading, as soon as I noticed that they were moving the story from the city into suburbia, let's say, I immediately keyed into that. And I was looking for little aspects pertaining to that. But this was a big thing because it started in what, 73, 74? Is that when Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out? 1974, right?
74, yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really the film that changed the direction of horror.
Oh yeah, it changed the landscape.
It's known for its significant contribution to the horror genre by shifting the focus from supernatural or fantastical creatures to human monsters.
Yes.
That's its key point. That's my key point of reference here, which then bleeds into what John Carpenter did in 79. It laid the path for a film like Halloween,
yeah.
which literally took the idea of suburban bliss and flipped it on its head. And from then on, throughout the entire 80s, you had a bunch of copycats. It became a part of the iconography of the slasher film.
Yes.
Where regular people were the villains that went around killing regular people like you and I living in our regular cookie cutter homes. It became a big dominant idea, theme, aspect within the iconography, whatever you want to categorize it in. It was a big element. And Hellblazer, once again, Jamie Delano is not just pulling cultural references, but he's utilizing things that were being done in film. And taking it and putting it into comic book form. And that goes back to what you said, David, when I asked your initial thoughts. You said that Delano was experimenting with comic book narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, I read lots of comics, and certainly I'm not saying Delano changed the game and he was the only one. Certainly there were other people doing similar things. We know for a fact. The dude that did the Doom Patrol run that I love, Grant Morrison, he did a lot of that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Jamie Delano pulling from movie aspects, movie themes, motifs, and putting it into comic book form is what helped Hellblazer gain its cinematic flair.
Well, think about it this way, too. I mean, issue number 3, we got introduced to demons, and we got to see the banker demon that Constantine had to deal with. And then you get to issue 4, and your villain is just this lumbering brute who we don't know who he worships, but he's a normal human being, just abnormally strong.
Yep.
And big, scary, but still, he's only human. And he's very reminiscent of like Michael Myers. Michael Myers was just a big, lumbering brute who stabbed people really well.
Really well.
And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface. And underneath all that gore and everything.
It's a brilliant film underneath all that gore.
Yeah. Underneath all that gore, Leatherface is still a human being.
That's the horror of it.
That's the horror of it.
Because suddenly we went from fictitious creatures that we all know don't exist to things that can absolutely kill us.
Yes.
Like crazy, twisted individuals. But that's the beautiful thing about the suburban bliss idea and horror, because you're taking, I suppose storytellers, I guess is a better way of saying that, storytellers can tap into the fears and anxieties associated with the fragility of safety, which we all know our home is our safety. That's our haven. That's where we feel the safest. And if you can remove that, then you're tapping into some really uncomfortable fears and phobias.
It's the fear of invasion. It's
Yes.
the fear of like having your domicile being invaded.
Rather than having these larger than life scenarios, suddenly there's the potential that horrors are hidden within the most mundane settings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that really worked for me.
Oh, it works too. It works as a masterpiece.
Yeah.
In this particular issue.
Another thing that really worked in this issue is the overall stylization. The iconography of film noir and all of its facets has always been used in Hellblazer, but again, I'm trying to keep my thoughts limited to just the 4 issues so far.
Yes.
But you really start to see that leap forward in this issue, especially when it comes to the amazing narration and voiceover. And I'm going to highlight 2 actual aspects that felt like, I'm telling you, man, I can hear the voice, the classic film noir voice, the music, the cabaret.
Yeah.
Or the slow jazz music that plays in the background. Her fluffy, her furry, Jesus, her fluffy. I can't even read. Her fury makes my blood run cold. Her anger's terrible and beautiful.
Yes.
Luckily, it runs out before she kills him. I mean, listen, I know that sounds very simple, but there's a specific way you have to write film noir narration, and he nailed it in this issue.
He nails it everywhere. I mean,
But it really starts to come through in issue 4. And I remember now that I'm reading these, a lot of the older stories are coming back to me. This is where it really starts to come through. That film noir aspect. In a lot of ways, you know, Delano's still trying to figure out Hellblazer. I mean, it's new. And of course, we know as comic books progress, ideas change, things that maybe the writer wasn't sure he wanted to completely include in the first opening issues because who knows, it might get canceled.
Yeah.
He may not be able to have his chances to do certain things, but as the story progresses and the months go by and he realizes he has a lot more room to play, many times the writers will start finding themselves. Times were a little different back then. When you look at these event series that we have a lot now, the writers don't have time to find themselves.
No.
They need to know exactly what they're going to do from the very beginning.
From issue 1.
When you're dealing with open-ended issues, open-ended stories, you have that room to progress. It's a lot like a TV show that you've watched for 5 seasons, and then you go back and you rewatch and you realize that the things you thought were built in from the very beginning weren't necessarily there. It was a slow evolution to being what it ends up becoming. And the same thing applies to Hellblazer. And you start seeing those film noir aspects really rearing its head beginning in this issue.
Oh yeah, because I think that this is the issue where Delano has set his feet. He's got his feet set.
Yeah.
As a writer.
Especially when you look at the introductions of these big players. These are big elements.
These are huge elements for the story for the next 300 issues that we're going to get. But I mean, like, one of my favorite things that basically just shows that, to me, imagining Delano coming up with these words, and it's like now he's found that confidence in his words to basically say what his story is trying to say, is like when they come across and he's going through descriptions, and everyone knows in a noir story, the detective is explaining everything. He has to say it in his narration, and he just hits it out of the park when he has John with going through the apartment, and he basically goes, "It's quiet as a tomb. I've made my own finds. The place is filthy, and there's a smell that seems to come from upstairs. The feet that carry me forward are not part of me. The hand that pulls the back of the cover isn't mine." That is like, come on. That is atypical noir dialogue. And Delano basically, you feel the confidence in his words. He's like, okay, I'm getting my rhythm now.
He's finding his feet.
I'm finding my feet.
Yeah.
He found his feet. Now he's in his rhythm.
Yeah.
This is his rhythm. He's going bam, 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 bam. This is what I want my story to sound like. And it's really cool to go back and look at this. And just like you said, not many comic book writers get a lot of time to get their story down. In past shows me and you have covered, I've always stated, comics nowadays, you need to hit it out of the park issue 1 to hook your audience. If you don't do that, you're going to lose them, and no one's going to buy issue 2. Back then, they had time to kind of find their footing. But when they found their footing, oh my God, you can actually, it is so cool watching a writer get into his rhythm, and basically you feel like it's almost like watching music being played, and you can see the musician in action. And that's why I love old comics. I love going back and reading like the Vertigo run during the 80s and 90s, because there's so much style in writing that's overlooked today.
Yeah. You're right. I can't disagree. So the characters and groups, Dave, let's go through these briefly because we're running out of time. So the 4 key elements when it comes to characters and groups: Zed, Jimma, Resurrection Crusaders, the Damnation Army. Big components moving forward. I don't want to offer any huge spoilers for people because I know, as I had said, Dave, there are some people who are following along for the first time with us as we discuss these. But Zed is a big player for the next 20 issues or so.
Yeah,
I believe
she's a big character in Constantine's. I wouldn't say rogues gallery, but definitely like
in his early stories.
in
for
his
sure.
early stories, she's
Yeah.
a huge part of his story.
And Gemma, as you had already said, her character carries over all the way into the final issue
Final
of
issue
Hellblazer.
of 300.
The
And it's-
Resurrection Crusaders are a big group
Yes.
that are a thorn in Constantine's side for various issues. The Damnation Army, I'm not quite.
I think they show up once in a while.
My memory isn't as good as it used to be, Dave. So I'm not quite sure how big the Damnation Army is in later issues, but they do play a significant role.
Yes.
All right. So I suppose it's time to move into our final thoughts, Dave. Go ahead and give me your final thoughts. You can keep it brief because I think people are pretty clear on how we feel about this issue. But if there's something that you feel like we missed, get into it and then give me your RMD score.
One of the things I think we missed too is just we glanced over it, but looking back at the Hellblazer title, just as a whole in writing, seeing the experimental ways that Delano was able to explore how a comic can transcend just being a simple kids comic.
Mm-hmm.
Also, multimedia wise, the thing that cracks me up, one of the things that I loved about this issue, when you get to the very end and you have this strange part where Delano wrote John Constantine lyrics for like a song.
Yeah.
That's an
That's
actual
right, yeah.
song
Yeah.
that DC created that you can actually listen to from Mucous Membrane, which is John Constantine's band. And you can,
I didn't know this.
yeah, you can look it up and you can actually find it's on YouTube. It's Venus in the Hard Cell. And it is the atypical thing you would expect to hear back in the day when it comes to that type of punk music. And I love the fact that basically you can see that they were trying so many different things for this title to see where it can go, where can it transcend. Can it go beyond just being a kid's comic or just being a comic in general where it's just words on a page? Give us it's the foundation of really great storytelling, flat out storytelling. It's why
It's fantastic
it's
storytelling.
fantastic storytelling. This is one of the works that basically I will always hold up and tell people this is why today you have so many comic book lovers and comic book historians saying that this belongs to be taught in college.
Oh, I would teach it.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? If I would throw in the first 12 issues
Of
and say,
Hellblazer.
I want you to read this. If you want to learn to write, I know this is a comic book, and some of you uppity, pretentious writers out there think it's silly. Read it.
Read it.
Learn from how he takes his writing from point A to point B, the experimentation of narrative usage, plot progression, cinematic aspects that he finds a way to include, the artistry, meaning the actual art itself. Come on. You could spend a semester
You could
on the
spend a
first 12
semester on
issues, and I'm
this.
not just blowing it. That's fact.
Oh, and that's why I say is like that's why this, particularly this issue is like the jump off point. This is where Delano really hits his stride, and you can point to this and say this is what needs to be taught.
But also, but not just from. And I think most of us have taken some type of humanities courses. I mean, even from a cultural standpoint,
Cultural study, absolutely.
You could study this and then compare it as we had did in this issue, and I believe our discussion for issue 3 as well, dealing with the Queen,
The Queen,
right? No, not the Queen, the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, yes.
You can delve into the cultural aspects.
Yeah.
and the inspirations. There's a lot to dissect. There's a lot of intelligence being put into this.
A lot of intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's why,
David,
the score for me is 100. I'm flat out telling you, I have yet to run into a Hellblazer that's less than 100.
My question for you, David, and also the listeners out there, if you want to throw in some input here, I would love to hear people's thoughts. Has the time passed for this type of stories, for these types of stories? And the reason why I ask that is because I don't believe there's anything consistently being published in comic book form that even comes close to this. Certainly there are great stories being told. That's not what I'm saying. There are. I'm talking about consistently. 300 issues worth. Are we getting stories that are as relevant as John Constantine? And there's a second part of this question. Is John Constantine's day in the sun over?
Oh, okay. So I get what you're saying.
Because for some reason, we can't get this type of thing going. Are readers just not acclimated to this type of stories? These types of... I can't speak anymore, David. Are readers not acclimated to these types of stories any longer?
I don't think it's the fact that the readers aren't acclimated to these type of stories. I think that when you start off at such a high mark for Hellblazer, like Delano and I forgot who followed him up to finish up the run up to 300. I forgot who the other writer was.
Enos.
But when you start on such a high note, it's almost kind of like for comic book readers today that read comics in today's standards, the one thing that I can probably compare this to is why Robert Kirkman can never continue Invincible, because Invincible was such a seminal story and so well told from beginning to end. Where else do you go?
It
with
was
that
Garth
character?
Ennis that took over.
Oh, it's Ennis?
Yeah.
So, like, when you get to that point, it's like, well, where do you go next? What can you do more than what was already just established? And with Constantine, you do have a valid point. Is kind of like after Hellblazer, everyone just fell into the trope of this is who Constantine is. This is what a Constantine story should be. And he became a little superficial. Because like, what else can you do with the character? Especially with, when you get to the 300th issue, most of the tie-ins with all the characters that you ran with him, they come to a conclusive end. And you don't see that very nowadays because many of the big two companies don't want an ending to your story.
There's something I also want to throw into the mix, Dave, because I know that we may get some discourse going, and I definitely want that. But I want to also preface that when I say like what Jamie Delano's doing with Hellblazer, I also mean the subtleties of his writing. There is no soapboxing. We do get a lot of, I guess you can say, air quotes here, culturally relevant stories, but they're patronizing.
Yes.
It's pandering.
I mean, the closest.
This is subtle. There's not someone who can pick up these first 4 issues that we've read and pinpoint through a superficial read. Oh, he is denouncing this group over here, and he's talking about this over here. You have to dig in deep. You got to do what they call a close reading. You have to really analyze it to see what's going on here, like what the framework of his narrative actually is. So that's another thing that I feel like I want to add into that question so that when people come back and respond, make sure you respond with a story that is not patronizing or pandering.
The closest ones I
don't want someone saying, gay people are people too. Yay, LGBT. That's weak.
Yes.
That is so fucking weak.
It's weak.
And that's what we get predominantly.
So
I'm talking about good coded writing.
The closest ones that I feel come close is Ram V Swamp Thing.
Okay.
That
I'll
comes
give you that.
close. And Cy Spurrier with his run on Hellblazer. The issue that I think with Spurrier's run on Hellblazer, it just felt like, I don't want to say that Spurrier was copying Delano, but it just felt like
you're not copying if you're writing within a
world.
yes.
You know, he was
You're
writing
being
within
consistent.
his world. His consistent. He was trying to be consistent with that world that got established.
Correct.
And I really wish Spurrier could have actually had a longer run than 12 issues.
Yeah,
But those are the only ones I can really
Yeah, I
think
agree.
of that get that close, where it's like, just like we said, close reading material.
Yeah. So you're giving us 100.
I'm giving it 100.
Okay. I was almost going to give it 100, but I also want to make sure my fanboyness isn't getting in the way. I want to be fair with our analysis. I say this is a 97% on the RMD score, which is still a fucking fantastic score. But sometimes I need to
You need to take a step
I need
back.
to rein myself in, David.
You don't want to splooge all over the pages.
Right. Unlike what we do on the Oblivion Bar discussion that we do for Patreon, where we talk about Zatanna.
And her nice.
Okay. All right. That does bring us to the end of this particular discussion and the end of our episode. I do want to remind people that we put out a Patreon exclusive show. It is called the Oblivion Bar, and we consider it a bit of a pre-show for our regular discussion, and we get into various DC comic related discussions dealing with the world of Constantine. We try to keep to our theme, which is Constantine and friends, but sometimes we just kind of bullshit. We're a little more casual. But if you want to, go to patreon.com/RaymanDigital and pledge $1, and you'll gain access to all future Oblivion Bar discussions, which range anywhere between 10 minutes to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. Just depends on how much time and what we're talking about. So head over, patreon.com/RaymanDigital. Also, leave us reviews on iTunes. We need them. Our listenership is good. I wouldn't be doing this show if we didn't have listeners. We have quite a bit. But our reviews, come on, we need those reviews. Don't be lazy. Don't make me sick the Damnation Army after you.
Damnation Army.
Right? It's not nice. All right. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.